types of individuals, because they're very dominant, I find it hard to be more dominant than they are actually in therapy. So I do miserable work with these types, just to be honest. Well, narcissistic personality, here's Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men. He's a pretty good example of a narcissist. Narcissists are very self-focused. They're egotistical, arrogant, they brag, they feel entitled, they are somehow special. They are better than other people. They have this grandiose way of being, and they may see themselves as being superior to other people or admirable in some way. I remember a number of years ago, I was over at my brother-in-law's house, and there was this guy that worked in the same field as he did in construction. And this guy started to talk, and then initially I thought, oh, that's interesting. This guy has done quite a few things in his life. But he wouldn't shut up about the things he did. It went on. And I'm thinking, is it just me? Am I reading this guy right? And everybody else in the room was just going, oh, man, please stop speaking. And this guy had those types of features. So they're egocentric, they're hyper-independent, they see themselves as superior to others, self-centered, constantly in need of praise. And so what happens is they want to surround themselves with people who will actually build into that. Kowtow, I guess, is the expression. You could probably come up with other expressions that would also fit. I've noticed with narcissistic types that when things are going really well, they'll tend to brag and be grandiose. If somehow they're not receiving that type of feedback from other people, this bubble will burst, and they wind up going into a secondary mode of paranoia. The idea here is that everybody's out to get them in some way. It could be, you also have to be careful that a person could be confident but not necessarily narcissistic. So it could be a style. But when you see this pervasive pattern over time of an individual behaving in a particular way, it could be narcissistic personality disorder. This is another group which I do absolutely miserable work with. I have difficulty stomaching narcissistic personalities, and I do everything in my life to rid myself of narcissistic individuals. In fact, I really won't have anything to do with them. I remember one time, a number of years ago, I was described as narcissistic. I was horrified. I thought, man alive, if I come across like that, it's all over, man. That's it, because this is abominable to me. Well, speaking of narcissists, the movie A Few Good Men, certainly Jack Nicholson's character is, and we're actually going to listen to a clip here of Jack in action. I found it was interesting. Yesterday I was doing this search looking for pictures to supplement the PowerPoint slides, and I found one of Tom, then I found one of Jack, both on Time magazine. I'd have to say that in a number of the movies Tom Cruise has been in, he comes across as quite narcissistic. You ever seen that movie Magnolia? I think that's a pretty good example of somebody who's quite narcissistic. So in this movie in particular, A Few Good Men, I think Nicholson's character, and if you're interested in some more background, it's sometimes interesting to take a look at these movie characters. We've heard a lot about Tom Cruise in the news lately in a variety of ways. My goal here is not to criticize Tom Cruise. He's obviously a very talented actor, but really doesn't know anything about psychiatry. But I just throw that in there. Anyway, if you ever check out Wikipedia, how many of you have done this? You sometimes make references. It's actually a very good source here in a lot of ways. What I wanted to call your attention to is really the tail end of this. There's a lot of information on him. And when we look at this one column, this is the type of money that he's making on films. Like, for example, Eyes Wide Shut, $20 million. Mission Impossible 2, $75 million. These individuals are in a totally different league than the rest of us. Tom Cruise doesn't care really what people think of him because of the money that he makes in these different movies. So it's just sort of an amazing thing. And you could do a similar search on Jack if you wanted to check it out. Also a very well-known actor. All right, how do the narcissists come across? They tend to be exploitive. They take advantage of individuals, and they see themselves as admirable, as we saw, as we heard in that clip of Jack Nicholson as Colonel Jessup. So you notice in the clip, this is a guy that his stance is, how dare you question me? Had he had an adaptive personality, he would not have answered the question, did you order a code red? But he thinks he's above the law in those circumstances, which is why he went in that particular direction. Well, we now come to my favorite actor of all time, Robert De Niro. It's interesting. For years I have admired this individual, and then I started reading parts of his personal philosophy, which kind of disturbed me. And one of the things he did say was, if there is a God, he has a lot to answer for. That really bothered me, that particular statement. But nonetheless, we can still admire his talent as an actor. And this picture that you see here is a picture from the movie Cape Fear. How many of you have watched that one? Cape Fear. Believe it or not, there's been more than one version of it. There was a version from the 1960s with Robert Mitchum, who incidentally was in the second version of Cape Fear as a detective. And so here we have Robert De Niro with all his tattoos and so forth. Antisocial personalities, they are impulsive, irresponsible, deviant types of individuals, unruly. They don't think about things. Basically, they act in their own best self-interest. They are disrespectful of the boundaries, the rights of other people. They see themselves as free and independent. And so in some ways, they're kind of like, there's this element of narcissism in the presentation. Part of the difference here, though, is with narcissistic personalities, you usually don't find this history of law-breaking. But with antisocials, you might. And in many cases, the antisocial history goes back a number of years. Although, we do have a number of antisocial personalities in our culture that have never been arrested, but they operate right on the fringes of things in terms of ethical behavior. It is really questionable, some of the stuff that they do and how they treat other individuals. And if you're interested in a bit on Robert De Niro, back to Wikipedia again. As I say, this is one of my favorite actors of all time. Just wanted to show you, like he's been in a pile of movies. Check out some of the incomes that he's been making. Analyze that, $20 million. And so we find with the more later movies, that's what he tends to be making per film. And it seems like he's producing about 3 movies a year. So he certainly he's done very well for himself. Interestingly enough, we're going to look at schizotypal personality disorder later on. He was the main character in it. In the 1970s, I think he did that one for $35,000. So what a contrast from then till now. So antisocial types, according to Milan, these are individuals that behave the way that they do because they don't want to be controlled or dominated by somebody else. You find that they tend to be aggressive, hostile, and reckless. These are your quote-unquote bad boys to the nth degree. They can also be very competitive, blunt, and intimidating. When you interview these types of individuals in counseling or assessment situations, you'll be mesmerized by the details of the things that they talk about. It's like, wow, this is an amazing kind of history. However, if you wind up confronting them about things, you potentially are in danger in those circumstances. They tend to have legal issues, vocational, marital difficulties. When they have jobs, they habitually steal from the job site. If they're married, they're habitually unfaithful to the individual if they can actually get to that particular stage. Yeah, 4% of the population, and they're saying that, depending on the study that you look at, somewhere between 50 to 75% of prison inmates have antisocial personality. Where these personalities become very dangerous is if you have this really callous way of being, but you're also reflective at the same time, which is what these guys are not. That's when they're largely men. This is why they wind up getting caught. My wife has worked in the correctional system, and she's talked about cases where police officers have gone undercover for even 2 years, try to catch somebody. She was telling me about this one incident where this guy, they couldn't nail him on it, so they had this officer go undercover for 2 years, befriend the individual, and eventually the guy made the disclosure. This is how a lot of the antisocials get caught.